What's going on, guys? This is the Red Rogue, and today we'll be starting a 3-part guide on rogues and the changes each spec has received in the Shadowlands Pre Patch. Today we'll be starting with no particular bias or favoritism whatsoever, by talking about the changes Outlaw will be seeing, so let's begin. So, as is what happens with new expansions, classes and specs often see a variety of changes. Rogue is no exception to this, and Outlaw in particular has received quite a few interesting things. I'll be covering all new, changed, and removed things Outlaw has seen with this patch, as well as some pointers and advice for talent choices, Azerite Armor, Azerite Essences, and a couple other things that have some relevance in pre-patch. While I knew a good amount of this information directly from experience on the PTR and beta, I will still give credit and thanks to Mistler for some confirmation and clarification about these changes. There are also other folks such as Kojiyama and Fu that have given me various insight on the theory crafting behind the spec, so thank you for that as well, guys. Also, if you want to know about a specific bit of information I'll be talking about in this video, there will be a pinned comment that has the timestamps for each section. First, we'll go over the new/returning abilities you'll be able to use as of pre-patch. For Outlaw, the return of poisons is a pretty big deal, as the last time we had them was when Outlaw was still combat spec. These are split between lethal poisons and non-lethal poisons. Our lethal poisons are instant poison and wound poison. Instant poison is a simple buff you apply to yourself that causes your auto attacks to have a 30% chance to deal nature damage to your target. Wound poison, on the other hand, is more PvP oriented. This will deal a smaller amount of damage than instant poison, but will apply a stacking debuff to your enemy that reduces the healing effects they receive by 8%. This effect stacks up to 3 times, resulting in a 24% reduced healing debuff. On non-lethal poisons, crippling poison is our only non-lethal poison currently available with pre-patch. This has a 30% chance to slow your opponents by 50% for 12 seconds. Which can prove useful in PvP, but also has applications in PvE, especially for Mythic Plus. The big benefit Outlaw has with the return of poisons is that they can be applied via Blade Flurry, which is fantastic news because that equals free and consistent DPS gains for us. With poisons returning, we also have the return of Shiv, which had been a PvP talent for quite a while. Shiv will deal a minor amount of damage, generate 1 combo point, and also applies a concentrated version of your non-lethal poison. With pre-patch, this will only affect crippling poison, which will apply a 70% slow for 5 seconds. For talents, our only new talent is Dreadblades, which some may remember from the Legion expansion as our artifact weapon's cooldown. This will deal some damage on activation and causes Ghostly Strike, Ambush, Sinister Strike, and Pistol Shot to generate a full set of combo points. However, each time you use a finisher, you will lose 5% of your current health. This cooldown is active for 10 seconds, and has a minute and a half cooldown and costs 30 energy to use. On the beta, this is not exactly a powerful talent choice, and it is on the same row as Alacrity, which has been a consistent and predictable haste buff option for several years, and will most likely be the best option unless some tweaks are done either to Loaded Dice or Dreadblades, unfortunately. Evasion has made its way back into the Outlaw toolkit as well, giving a 100% dodge chance for 10 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. And we also see the return of Kidney Shot, our old melee range finishing move that stuns its target for a duration based on how many combo points are spent. This was done due to a change made to Between the Eyes. Speaking of changes, we'll go over all the abilities that have changed but are technically still around as Outlaw. Between the Eyes is no longer a ranged stun, which has had a bit of a mixed reception. Its cooldown has been increased to 45 seconds as well. However, it has had an added bonus. Whatever target you hit with Between the Eyes will have a debuff applied to them, causing them to be 20% more likely to be critically hit. This is pretty awesome, as it buffs not only our single target damage against that target, but also our AoE, as long as we cleave off of said target. This in turn means you'll ideally want to apply the debuff to a target that will survive for the duration of the debuff if possible, and cleave off of it onto the group surrounding it. Speaking of cleave, Blade Flurry has had a couple big changes as well. It no longer has 2 charges, and has been target capped to a total of 5 targets, so basically only 4 additional targets plus your primary one. Target capping of AoE moves is a pretty common sight to see in Shadowlands, unfortunately, and it will take some time to get used to during the pre-patch. Blade Flurry also deals 40% of your damage to extra targets, up from 30%, and is also now affected by cooldown reduction effects such as Restless Blades and True Bearing. Due to this, it's likely you will have an even higher uptime of Blade Flurry than we did in Battle for Azeroth, which is pretty sweet. Honestly, I can usually hold at between 90 to 100% uptime of Blade Flurry. One of the biggest changes in the game for Outlaw was to Roll the Bones. Roll the Bones is now a 45-second cooldown that is affected by both Restless Blades and True Bearing. This means you won't have to worry about re-rolling because you can't. I'm personally kinda mixed on this change, though I think it does make the spec play better in terms of a rotation since you're not just spamming Roll the Bones all the time because you keep getting Skull and Crossbones or something lame. It also now only costs 25 energy and doesn't cost combo points, so it's pretty economical in those regards. For Roll the Bones buff changes, the only one that has seen any is Grand Melee, which no longer gives increased attack speed. Instead, it gives 15% leech, down from 25%, and makes it where every combo point spent while Slice and Dice is active will increase the duration of Slice and Dice by 2 seconds. Oh yeah, Slice and Dice. That was changed as well, and has been moved from a talent to a baseline ability for all rogues. Slice and Dice now is another maintenance finisher, increasing your attack speed by 50% while it's active. This change, for Outlaw at least, is a great addition, as it greatly improves our Man-Gauche procs and our combat potency procs. That and auto attack damage is always a pretty high amount of Outlaw's base damage, so more attack speed is good attack speed. For other talents, Retractable Hook has been changed as well. Not only does it reduce the cooldown of Grappling Hook, but it also increases the speed at which you fly through the air while using it. This might have some niche usage here and there in Raiding or Mythic Plus, but I imagine it having slightly more purpose in PvE environments than PvE. Killing Spree also got a minor change, and no, it's still bad, unfortunately. This is another part of the AoE target capping nerf that has come with Shadowlands, so Killing Spree only hits up to a total of 5 targets while Blade Flurry is active. I miss when Killing Spree was good. It's such a shame. Anyways. While a small change, Blizzard has begun removing some things from the GCD, finally. For Outlaw, this is in particular to Adrenaline Rush, which doesn't really do anything for our rotation or playstyle to make it better off, but it doesn't make it where you don't need to do some weird Adrenaline Rush, then go into Stealth and Ambush Opener for your raid pulls, and can instead just be hit after Ambush, which is pretty nice. For removed abilities, this list is thankfully pretty small. Riposte was removed due to receiving Evasion back as one of our baseline defenses. Honestly, this was a good change since Riposte couldn't work on ranged moves, so it kinda sucked. So in regards to BFA game systems during pre-patch, I'll be covering talent choices, Azerite Armor, and Azerite Essences. For level 50 endgame content, our talent choices will be largely unchanged, though I'll go through each row and explain why that's the case. For our level 15 talent row, Quick Draw will continue to be the best option. We're able to stack this extra damage with the Deadshot Azerite trait, though we'll be getting less between the eye casts off due to the increased cooldown, which is something to keep in mind. Weapon Master loses a lot of effectiveness due to the Keep Your Wits About You Azerite trait, and Ghostly Strike is something we will potentially see being the best pure single target talent once Azerite Armor is gone, though this can change as beta builds adjust with tuning and all that. The level 25 talent row is entirely up to personal preference, though in my opinion and that of most Outlaw rogues, the extra melee range granted by Acrobatic Strikes is invaluable in Raiding and Mythic Plus. For PvP, I could maybe see some varying options, I guess. Retractable Hook does reduce our movement abilities cooldown and makes it work faster, which can be nice to close gaps, and Hit and Run is always a good option while leveling since moving faster inherently means leveling faster if you can't mount inside of like a cave or a dungeon or things like that. The level 30 row is going to be very much up to your discretion as well. For most of Battle for Azeroth, Deeper Stratagem has been the go-to talent for the increased finisher damage. Marked for Death has seen some interesting plays in Mythic Plus and raid encounters where you can abuse the ability's reset on target death effect. Kinda like the Breath of the Dying Azerite Essence. Vigor is always an acceptable option for those looking for a smoother rotation. However, at this late in the expansion and with the right gear, you most likely shouldn't have too many issues in that regard. It's always best to sim yourself or find what talents work best for your playstyle, so just bear that in mind with most of these recommendations. The level 35 row of talents has seen literally no changes, so this is again up to your preference. In world content, Iron Stomach can be a nice way to improve self-healing, whereas Cheat Death is my preferred option. This can be very useful for intentionally cheesing mechanics, though it also helps to cover up a blunder or two if you aren't paying attention or just make a goof on something. Elusiveness is always a great option if you are very confident in your usage of Feint to mitigate damage. Our level 40 talent row as well is basically the same, so the utility benefits you gain from this will change on your preference. I will say though that now that Between the Eyes is not a stun, I am much less impressed with the Prey on the Weak talent. For PvP, this is of course still a nice way to increase damage for you and your group on a target, though the increased range and cooldown of Blind is a pretty strong option as well. I'll probably be running either Dirty Tricks or Prey on the Weak in PvE though, as I tend to use Gouge a lot in Mythic Plus to interrupt spellcasts that no one has a kick up for, or moves that can be skipped entirely by using Gouge, so less energy spent on CC is always good. For level 45, we finally have our first talent change in a while with the introduction of Dreadblades. Unfortunately, from the testing I've done on the beta and the sims I've seen, it is an extremely low DPS increase, like probably under 2 to 3% at most. Loaded Dice is slightly better, but neither really compete with the 10% flat haste bonus of Alacrity, which really isn't really even that OP of a talent, but we keep ending up with extremely weak alternatives on the same row, Blizzard. I sincerely hope this will be tuned in the future, but for now, yeah, Alacrity is still basically your only real DPS gain option. If you really just want to have 2 Roll the Bones buffs active at any given time, then Loaded Dice is not a terrible DPS loss and can make the new Roll the Bones feel less punishing since you can't reroll as often as you want. Lastly, the level 50 talent row. Killing Spree is still bad, and I'm still sad. It's a shame, and I wish they'd buff this move somehow. Dancing Steel is still a respectable option for AoE, however with the new changes to Blade Flurry, it honestly isn't as amazing as it was prior to pre-patch. You can basically get Blade Flurry off cooldown before the buff falls off, due to the cooldown reduction effect on it, so the extra 3 seconds and minor damage increase really isn't that impressive. Also, since Blade Flurry is target capped, you're getting less bang for your buck on that 5% damage increase during Blade Flurry. Blade Rush, therefore, becomes our strongest option in virtually every scenario. I'm honestly pretty happy with this, because Blade Rush was always our best single target option, and gives us energy. Blade Rush also currently doesn't have a target cap on the initial big hit you throw out if Blade Flurry is active at the same time, which is kinda nice in a world with lots of target capping, so I wouldn't be surprised if this gets changed in the future. That, and it works as a gap closer due to the lunge effect, which is pretty cool. For stat priorities as Outlaw, you're always best to simulate your own character. However, as of current simulations, it is best to prioritize item level over secondary stats, though you'll want to look over your secondary stats in the following order. Versatility, which is greater than Critical Strike, which is greater than Mastery, which is greater than Haste. Again, your own stat priorities will change based on your stats, gear, essences, Azerite loadouts, item level, all that stuff. Simulating your loadout is very important. However, I would always say to be open-minded by what is quote-unquote the best way to do something. You never know exactly what you'll find if you experiment with things. Believe me, I'm no super theory crafter, but I find random crap that isn't working right or the way Sims should work, so just from experimenting and testing things, I've seen things that aren't exactly accurate, so just kinda look things over and don't look at everything at 100% face value. Okay, so on to Azerite Armor. Much like prior to the pre-patch, you'll be looking for pretty much a lot of the same things. Ace Up Your Sleeve and Deadshot are great Outlaw-specific Azerite traits you can stack as they feed into our quick draw and pistol shot-oriented rotation that we're used to for basically the entirety for Battle for Azeroth. You'll still want one Keep Your Wits About You trait, as it is by far the best multi-target Azerite power you can have as Outlaw, but you only really need one. The reason for this is because the damage benefit to Sinister Strike isn't that big, and you're really only searching for the percent increased chance for Sinister Strike to proc an extra hit, which doesn't increase with extra copies of the same Azerite trait. Honestly, a good thing to have on your gear in any situation, unless you're literally 100% positive you're in a raid encounter or something with no extra targets at all. Then you can roll an extra single target or stat-oriented benefit. Outside of Outlaw-specific traits, you can run a number of stat buff or proc things like Clockwork Heart, Blightborn Infusion, Swirling Sands, or Heart of Darkness. And before you say anything, they got rid of the corruption requirement on Heart of Darkness, so you can run a bunch of those and you don't need to wear 25 corruption because corruption doesn't exist anymore, so that's cool. All of these are stat proc effects, which are always nice to have. For Azerite Essences, there are quite a variety of ones you can use. I always and highly recommend running simulations for anything you change, though simulations in pre-patch are currently showing that in single target, the Condensed Life Force is the best essence for a single target usage. This particular essence comes from running the Eternal Palace raid in Nazjatar numerous times, which was part of the patch 8.2 of Battle for Azeroth. Seems kinda silly for Blizzard to do that, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles. Honestly, it's kind of absurd and genuinely not very smart for them to make new players clear a raid that was already out of date before this pre-patch even hit, but you unfortunately would have to do that for the most ideal single-target oriented essence as of current simulations. For multi-target, the essence of the Focusing Iris is the best simming multi-target scenario essence, and this comes from doing Mythic Plus dungeons. Since getting rank 3 does come from your Mythic Plus caches, it does have a bit of a grind to it unless you have it unlocked on anyone else. There are multiple ranks to essences, so you can earn various ranks based on the content you're doing. There are, of course, many other options for Azerite Essences. These are just the ones that are simulating well as your major essence for overall performance, and I still will always highly recommend you make your own simulations for stat values, talents, trinkets, and preferred playstyle. For example, Blood of the Enemy technically has never simmed higher, but it feels better to use than a channeled move like the Essence of the Focusing Iris, so you might be inclined to use that instead. You never know what you'll come across just from trying obscure or unknown builds that can very well become the meta, quote-unquote. Minor slotted Azerite Essences are still exceptionally important as they give a variety of strong benefits. The easiest minor essence to level up is Crucible of the Flame, as all it requires is to increase the level of your Heart of Azeroth. Due to the artifact knowledge catch-up mechanic, this should take very little time at all to reach rank 3 of Crucible of Flame, and simply requires doing some world quests to rank it up. Memory of Lucid Dreams is an exceptional minor essence as well, as it has a lot of energy regeneration built into it as well as free healing. This essence comes from the Nazjatar zone of patch 8.2 and is increased in power by leveling up your followers to certain levels as required by the quest chain. As you increase their combat power, you'll gain higher levels of the Memory of Lucid Dreams Azerite Essence. Breath of the Dying is one of the newest Azerite Essences included in Battle for Azeroth, and is ranked up by earning Breath of Everlasting Spirits from the daily vision quests in either Vale of Eternal Blossoms or Uldum, based on where the invasion is taking place for the week. Rank 3 is acquired by reaching Revered with the Uldum Accord. Again, there are many other essences you can use of various types, such as Vision of Perfection from Mechagon, or Blood of the Enemy from PvP Battlegrounds, so it's best to sim what you have available to see what performs best and what you enjoy using the most. There isn't much to say about the stat priority of Outlaw, since it's pretty similar to what we're used to as far as Battle for Azeroth is concerned. As a pre-patch, we'll be looking at Agility, which is greater than Versatility, which is greater than Critical Strike, which is then greater than Mastery, which is then greater than Haste in that order, at least according to simulations. This will very quickly change with your loadout. As I mentioned earlier, you should always simulate based on your own character and your own loadout, not just off a random chart or off of what some potentially super charming YouTuber tells you, since your gear and loadout can change your stat priority very quickly. You most likely won't need to wear any haste gear in the pre-patch, as it's highly recommended to use the Overwhelming Power Minor Azerite trait to buff your haste stat enough to cover your needed amount for a smooth rotation as Outlaw. Mastery ended up becoming a better stat surely due to the addition of Slice and Dice as a baseline maintenance buff, though in Shadowlands you might be surprised how well it will potentially turn out. While not much of a rotation per se, you do have some relatively important priorities to keep in mind. Much like the rest of Battle for Azeroth, you should keep Between the Eyes basically on cooldown during pre-patch. Ideally, if you're an AoE, you want to cast Between the Eyes on a higher health target, or at least the one that won't die quickly so you can cleave off of it for the full duration of the critical chance bonus during Blade Flurry. Roll of Bones will be used on cooldown. You'll want to make sure you're using Dispatch as well, basically to spend as many combo points as you can. Opportunity procs from Pistol Shot are great and should be used as often as possible, especially with Deadshot Azerite traits lining up. I hope this video helps explain some of the nuances to the pre-patch Outlaw Rogue to returning players and new players in general. If this video was helpful to you, any likes, comments, or new subscribers are always fantastically appreciated. If you're new around to my little corner of the YouTube algorithm, I'd like to welcome you to come check out the rest of the channel. I do new uploads every weekday on a variety of content, especially on rogue-specific stuff. I'd also like to take this time to thank my regular viewers, commenters, subscribers, and especially my patrons for helping make these Shiba Shenanigans possible. Thank you all so much for watching. This is the Red Rogue, and I'll see you guys around.